So Cindy Daniels, Assistant Superintendent for Chino Valley Unified School District, welcome.
Thank you.
Happy to have you here because you are going to be moving to the superintendent position soon. When do you take over the superintendent slot?
So I officially begin on July 1.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
John Scholl is a fantastic human being. We love him.
Yep.
But I guess he's moving on.
He is. Moving on into retirement and moving on to working in his tax business.
Yeah. So he does little taxes for us. Yeah. Great guy. So cheers to him. How long have you been with the Chino Valley School District?
So I have been the assistant superintendent in Chino Valley for 16 years.
Just a little bit.
Just 1 or 2 days.
What's the biggest change you've seen in the last 16 years, both in the school district and the community?
Well, this is actually my 35th year in education. And I've seen a lot of changes over the course of my tenure in this business. Chino Valley is a fun and unique place. I was having a conversation last night with an employee who worked for us for several years. She decided to leave the district, maybe make a little bit more money somewhere else, and has decided she really misses Chino and wants to come back. And,
nice.
And I asked her, what's bringing you back? And she said, I miss the realness. I miss the rawness, the grittiness, that people are real, that there are no facades. What you see is what you get. And I would tell you that's the thing that has always drawn me to Chino. And Chino has a very, very special place in my heart. My kids went through school in Chino. Both my kids are graduates of CVHS. And I think that has afforded me a unique perspective, both as parent and as administrator. It's also made me think about, I want my schools to be what I would want my kids to go to, what I want my kids and maybe someday grandkids to be part of. And I think if it's not good enough for my kids, it shouldn't be good enough for anybody's kids.
Right.
And so that's been a big driver for me. So some of the big changes that we've had, there've been, the political winds have blown hard and strong into public education. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true of a lot of segments in our society, but it has affected public education in some interesting ways. And one of those interesting ways is school choice. Some people know it by vouchers. Some people know it by empowerment scholarship accounts. But other things that we've seen change in the district are about 17 or 18 years ago, I had the privilege of serving on the steering committee for Mountain Institute and was one of the people that wrote the plans that went to the voters. And I am a huge believer in career and technical education.
Love that.
And I want our schools to prepare kids for career, no matter if it's career instantly out of high school or career after a little bit more education, whatever that path looks like, whether it looks like military, whether it looks like some other kind of public service. And that has been probably the biggest positive change I have seen in public education, is that we have so much more to offer kids. And we've gone from being an isolated district trying to do everything on our own to having very, very robust partnerships. And those partnerships are super duper important to me, whether it's our partnership with Yavapai College. John Morgan used to teach at Chino Valley High School. And so he
still lives out there, I think.
He does live in Chino, and his wife will be retiring from our district this year. Uh-huh. And so that has afforded us opportunities. So our partnership with Yavapai College is really strong. Our partnership with Mountain Institute is very strong. And what has that meant for kids in terms of education? When I came to Chino Valley, we were offering 0 dual enrollment courses with the college. And what those are, it's an opportunity for kids to obtain college credit while they're in high school at no cost to their family. So Chino Valley covers the cost of dual enrollment in our partnership with YC. So we went from 0 16 years ago to over 100 dual enrollment offerings now.
That's huge.
So a kid can graduate from high school with an associate's degree.
I wish more people would do that.
Well, and for free.
Right.
In higher ed is very, very expensive. And we have 27 different career and technical education programs that lead to industry certifications. So those are things that when kids leave high school, they are well prepared. So that has probably been the biggest positive change I've seen, that it's given us a sense of direction. And it's turned what we do in Chino Valley into something very purposeful and consumer driven. So one of the things I was asked frequently when I came to Chino is, why don't we offer advanced placement or AP classes? And so I had been asked enough that I thought, I'm going to float that out there and see. We did an experiment. We ran one year. And if you're unfamiliar with AP, students have to not only complete the course, but obtain scores on a test. And then universities and colleges can decide whether they're going to accept that score for credit or not. Mm-hmm. And what I found was our students and families weren't interested in that because what they get from Yavapai College is a real college transcript with a real grade on it that goes anywhere. And that's guaranteed. And that's different than taking an AP test and maybe having a score that a university or college doesn't accept.
Right.
And so we've tried really hard to be responsive to what our community wants. And as the face of Chino Valley has changed, we are more than 50% 50 and older. What we find is that a lot of people who come to our community don't have a connection to our schools, but they do have strong opinions about what schools should be offering, whether it's civics, whether it's patriotism, whether it's preparing students for the workforce. A lot of times people might see on social media things like schools should be offering home ec and auto mechanics. Well, today's CTE is not your grandma's home ec or your granddaddy's auto mechanic. Today's CTE is learning how to make more than a living wage in a highly technical world. So those are some of the positive things that have changed what we do, and it's changed it all the way to kindergarten. We talk about, we're rolling out career corners in our primary school this year. So we'll have students who can dress up and role play different careers. They can read books and learn about careers. They can watch videos on careers. So we're starting those conversations very, very early, not to push kids to a certain career, but to help them figure out what they're not interested in.
What their opportunities are.
Yeah. And that all of these things exist. So I would say from a positive standpoint, those are the things that have been a wonderful positive change in not only public education in general, but in Chino Valley. Some of the things that have been more challenging changes are changes that have been exerted on us from outside forces. Like we had control over really rolling toward a strong career and college readiness, but you don't have control over whether state legislators decide to have scholarships for students that families can take to remove their children from public school. And right now that is a thing. This morning I put the news on, which I try not to do because I always think it's, what am I supposed to be worried about today?
Right.
Is what the news is.
Yep.
Not the good stuff, but what am I supposed to be worried about? And I saw an ad this morning from the State Superintendent of Public Education, Tom Horn, promoting empowerment scholarship accounts. His job is to support public education in Arizona, not to direct money away from public education.
So let's dig in that, because I heard a little bit on the water cooler talk out in the hallway about it. And I think this is something really important for people to understand and how it impacts our local schools.
And I do think it's important. It doesn't just impact Chino, it's impacting every regular public school in Arizona.
Okay.
So, to illustrate that, Mesa Unified is letting over 400 teaching positions go to attrition because of loss of student population. Paradise Valley is closing a minimum of 4 elementary schools this coming school year. So it's not just impacting urban areas, it's also impacting rural areas. And what does that look like? What can a parent do if they decide to access the Empowerment Scholarship account, and what is it? So what it is a redirect of public tax money to a private individual to use for schooling of their choice for their child. So for example, this year in Chino Valley, we've lost 70 students. We're down 70 from the prior year.
How many total students in the district?
About 2,200.
Okay.
And it doesn't sound like much, but it's over $600,000.
Close to 5%, right? I mean,
and $600,000 is a big hit.
Right.
So that means you have to rethink. It doesn't mean you can have less bus runs. It doesn't mean all 70 kids came from the third grade. When they're sprinkled out all over the whole district, it makes it very challenging to say, where can we reduce costs? And school districts, about 85% of their budget is staff. So of course you start looking at staff. But so how do parents get the money? How much money do they get and what can they use it for? So an empowerment scholarship account can be used for parents to provide an education for their child outside of out of their neighborhood school, for example, is what we would normally think about. So right now, the minimum for like an elementary kid who's a general education student, a parent could receive about $7,000 a year. The average empowerment scholarship is $9,700 a year because high school kids cost a little bit more to educate, because you think about things like biology labs, like equipment is expensive, CTE, equipment is expensive. So high school kids generate a little bit more money in average daily membership is how the state defines it. And so other things that impact the dollar value associated with educating a child could be if they're special needs and what kind of need they have. So for example, some students who have maybe a significant special need might require a one-on-one person with them at school. Maybe the student has profound medical condition, you know, something like that. But it could be a student with dyslexia, but that doesn't cost as much for someone to help balance out what the student's needs are. So if a student is special ed qualified, depending on what their qualifying area is, that means the parent would have access to more funding. So what's happened is we are compelled by federal law to test everybody who requests a test for special education if they have a need that merits it between the ages of 3 and 22. So with the advent of empowerment scholarship accounts, we have had a lot of people from who have never sent their kids to us requesting to have their kid tested for special ed because they're hoping that they'll qualify for more money. We have to pay for the testing.
So I want to clarify something. What is so taxpayers understand this. What is the average amount when you talk about this empowerment scholarship account that people want to apply for? What is the average amount that they can realize if they get approved?
But the average distribution right now is $9,700 per student per year.
So $9,700. So anybody that's either already in the public school system, or they may be living, let's say, in your school district, but they've never attended public school. Let's say they either are homeschooled or they're in a private school. Sure. You're telling me that those tax dollars, that $9,700, can be redirected through the empowerment scholarship account, and then that person can pay for private school with that dollar.
They could pay for private school with it, whether it's sectarian or non-sectarian. And typically public money has not been allowed to support a sectarian education, church and state separation issues. But they can also use it for curriculum to homeschool their kids. They can use it for, well, if you've been to Phoenix recently, there are signs on every corner advertising pay for your kids' karate lessons with your empowerment scholarship account, as if it were replacing PE. And so people are using it to pay for their children to participate on traveling sports teams and things like that. And people who might be listening might say something like, how can that be? Well, there's actually very little oversight and very little accountability. In fact, recently, a credit union turned in employees from Arizona Department of Education who had created fictitious birth certificates and were skimming hundreds of thousands of dollars away from the state coffers into their own personal bank accounts. And because there is little oversight, for example, families who utilize the Empowerment Scholarship account, they're not compelled to have their children participate in state testing. So schools who have state money and local money to support their district we're held accountable, right? We have to have annual fiscal audits. We have to have multiple programmatic audits. We have state testing to make sure students are making adequate academic progress. But people who utilize the Empowerment Scholarship account aren't compelled to any of those measures of oversight.
Wow. Where my mind goes is it's not just about the money leaving, I guess you could say public, taxpayer money,
sure,
your wallet, my wallet, leaving the school district and going to something, a private choice, number one, that we don't have any control of as a taxpayer. But number two, you talk about all this infrastructure that the taxpayer has built up over the decades, and I'm talking about the school district specifically.
Sure, buildings, buses,
and so forth. Every $9,700, or let's call it $10,000, let's round it up. I don't know if that's adjusted for inflation or not, right? Like you said, that doesn't mean that there's less bus routes.
Correct.
So all these dollars are taken from those programs. So now we have less money to maintain our bus lines. We have less money to maintain our facilities and our operations, which means what? The inevitable, right? Things are going to start to bust.
Well, and what we do instead is we have to, and this is what I've told people as I'm moving into this new role, is that we're in belt tightening mode. We're not in belly button to the backbone, but we are definitely in belt tightening mode. And why is that? Because we don't know where it's headed. We receive our funding basically kind of month to month. So it's adjusted throughout the year. So it's not like we know we have to build a budget on presumptive enrollment for the next year.
Right. You're forecasting.
But it's adjusted every month. And so because of that, that definitely presents challenges. So what do? We do things like we have to maintain the buildings. We have to make sure kids are safe on school buses because that's the ethical thing to do for the taxpayer and for their children. So we have to look for cuts other places. So those cuts may come in the form of positions that when somebody resigns, we don't fill the position. And maybe we don't fill it ever. Maybe we don't fill it right away. Maybe we leave it sit vacant, which is what we're doing. And I know that in some of our neighboring districts, they've issued contracts to people, but they haven't told them where they're going to be assigned because they don't know where it's going. And so every district is taking their own approach to how they're like really managing that. And so one of the things that we've done is one of the roles that I've had in Chino Valley that I'll continue to have in the superintendency is I write our competitive funding. And so I chase dollars from atypical sources. So for example, last week we were awarded $40-something thousand for nursing supplies. One of the areas that we identified that we had a need was adding additional AED devices, some with outdoor covers so we could put them where they're needed, football field, baseball field, school playground, right, things like that. Well, those are things that cost a lot of money, and it's something that we would typically back burner. And by chasing this competitive funding for nursing supplies, we were able to procure things that otherwise we may not be able to procure for a while. So that's part of what I do. And over the course of the years in Chino, we've been able to bring in tens of millions of dollars in funding outside our normal state money. But it's not always available. However, that was one thing that when the board asked if I would consider doing this job, they asked me if I would continue keeping the competitive funding. And I've had people tell me it's funny to me. I guess I don't think about it. I just do it. That apparently I have some kind of a skill for spinning straw into gold, but which is funny because Rumpelstiltskin was my favorite fairy tale as a child. And so that was the gist of that fairy tale. So it has been, we are having to not only tighten our belts, we're having to seek funding from atypical sources, right, which means that it redirects resources, right? That redirects my time.
I was going to say, is this the normal role of a superintendent as you roll into that position?
No, it's not. But one of the things that we've done in Chino is we are letting 8 teaching positions go to attrition. So we're not
18, you said?
8.
8, okay.
So we are not releasing staff, but as the positions have become vacant, we're just opting not to fill them. And we are also letting my current position in the school district go to attrition as well. Since I'm leaving that position and moving into the superintendency, we're not getting rid of the assistant superintendent title. We're shifting it to the HR director. Heidi Wolf will be the assistant superintendent starting July 1. And the curriculum instruction and assessment responsibilities that I've had will now fall on Julie Bryce. So we've all decided we're willing to take on extra work in order to help the school district also save money, because we feel like that's a fair and equitable thing. I'm not comfortable asking schools to take a big hit if the district office isn't willing to take it as well. So those are some of the things. I want to get back to one of the pieces of the Empowerment Scholarship account.
Sure.
There's one part of it that I think is very valuable, and it's the part that really started this in the first place. You know, a lot of people view it as this very start as kind of the cracking the door open to a voucher system, which it did. But initially it was set up for parents with special needs students who had very profound issues.
Right.
Because local districts a lot of times don't have the resources to meet the students' needs. So it allowed the parents to take the money that the school does, in some cases $30,000, and find a private placement for their child that would better meet their needs. And you know what? Rural schools has been my life, and I get that we don't have the resources for some unique needs. So starting it that way, it wasn't a bad idea. In fact, I think it really helped some families. But what happened is now it's available to everybody for any reason. And right now the state is hundreds of millions of dollars upside down from what they budgeted for empowerment scholarship accounts. And I would encourage taxpayers to seek out that information, because that's our hard-earned money, right?
Right.
And one of the things that was also, the concept wasn't a bad concept, but sometimes when politics gets involved, it doesn't turn out the way it started, right? And one of the concepts was, what if my kid goes to a school that kind of stinks? And I want a better life and a better education for my kids, but I can't afford to send them to a private school. So this round 2 was, if a kid is in a persistently low performing or failing school, that the parent could withdraw them and use that money for private school tuition. Well, Arizona already has a tax credit program that allows people to redirect Arizona tax dollars to private school. But now you can redirect other public dollars. And what happened was, over 70% of the students who are attending private school and using the vouchers to pay for it never, ever, ever have attended a public school. So,
yikes.
So that was something that I think if anybody had stopped to think about, thought, wow, this could be a possibility, but I don't think they were anticipating it on the scale. So for example, schools in metropolitan Phoenix, maybe Brophy or schools like that have, $30,000 or $40,000 per year tuition. Parents were managing to pay that before,
right? But
now they can use $7,000, $9,000, whatever $1,000 of taxpayer money to offset their tuition costs for their kid at private school. And their kid never ever was present in a public school. We have 2 new private schools in Chino Valley that did not exist prior to the Empowerment Scholarship account. One is specifically designed for students of special needs who have pretty unique special needs. And I would say that school is fulfilling a niche market. And for some parents, they feel better having their kids in a small environment. I understand that. There's another sectarian school that's opened in our community. They currently have 27 students, and I asked them how many take the Empowerment Scholarship account. 26.
Wow.
And those are students that were in our school before.
26 times 10,000.
Sure.
Right?
So,
$250,000.
So it's helping them run a school. And so those are just some interesting dynamics when you ask about what's changed in public education. The politicizing of public education and public education funding is something that is very, very different from what it was in the past.
I think You're a great guest, by the way, because you have all the information in your head and you know the questions to ask yourself. So I really appreciate you being here. I think I'm going to go retire and I'll just keep you talking.
I tell people if I ever slip and hit my head, we're screwed.
And I mean that sincerely, because these are the kind of topics that are complicated.
They are.
And have somebody convey them very clearly for the listener so people can make choices and get informed. In your opinion, what's the start of the solution?
Well, I think part of it is that public schools are not used to self-promoting because we've always been the only game in town.
Right.
And there's a lot of feel-good nostalgia about neighborhood schools. Mm-hmm. And that really started to change with about one generation ago, where people started questioning the role of public education, or what was the role of public education. And unfortunately, on both coasts of the United States, there are some belief systems or things that have infiltrated public schools that a lot of the rest of the country find problematic. And so people are worried because social media promotes it, right? People promote what I'll call, the common myths, right. But it creates distrust or questions in the mind of the public, or assumptions that may or may not be true about their local schools. And in our community in Chino Valley, we have it's more than 50% of our community are people who have come to Chino to retire from a neighboring state. And that neighboring state has had highly volatile public education issues.
Yep.
And because of that, people bring assumptions from their prior location to the new location. And once in a while, they'll come to a board meeting and, this is going on. And I'm just going to say this, unfortunately, there is another school district with almost the same name as ours in that neighboring state.
Chino Hills, I think
it is. And it is Chino Valley School District as well.
Okay.
And they have their governing board has made some very controversial decisions this year. And we've taken quite a few angry phone calls from people who did not notice they were dialing the wrong state. And so we actually have their phone number posted at all our school counters so people can redirect angry callers to the right state, so they can complain to the right school district, not the wrong one.
These I call it the fringe, right? The fringe minority are taking over the voice of the silent majority.
So we need to do a better job. We need
to do a better job. I agree with you. But what I was talking to my wife about the other night was, I truly believe, and here we are we live in digital media. This is what we do as an agency at Talking Glass, on signalsaz.com, all digital. But because we're in it daily, and I just sit there and study it quietly, and it's hard to do because of all the negativity, is these echo chambers have been created by these social media platforms, probably inadvertently, and they become sources of grief because people are constantly negative, constantly complaining. And I know you know this because you're an educator, is that you're familiar with the stages of grief. And we just went through this. We lost a family member. And it starts off with just depression and grief, slowly goes to anger, right? And sometimes circles back again. If we're all lucky, we grow out of that and we move on. We learn from those losses. But when we see social media, it's almost like an eddy in a river, and it just keeps circling around between grief and anger and grief and anger. And then you throw in misinformation. And we were talking about this. I really think it's a major source of grief. Even though most of it's anger, it always circles back to grief. It seems like people are upset, but they're not learning anything and they're not providing solutions. And you, of course, come from the positive angle and say, well, we need to do a better job. And that's why you're here, is I'm hoping that we continue talking about these complicated matters, but they're legal, they're political, and all you guys want to do is teach our kids, right?
Yeah, that's I think about this. One of the things, and I think you're really on to something there, because I think what people are grieving is a loss of what they perceive the world was.
Yep.
And so, whether it's small town values, flag waving, wholesomeness, things like that. And there's a lot of, everything really has a seed of truth, right? And some of the best myths have a strong seed of truth in them.
Yep.
And so, and I do think, when you talk about things like digital media creating this black hole, I honestly don't think that's anything new, because what's the oldest saying in journalism? Bad news makes good copy.
Right.
And I don't think that I don't think it's any different now. It's like when I said I turn on the news in the morning to find out what I'm supposed to be worried about.
Right.
I'm generally a very optimistic person. And I would say that people are grieving what they perceive as almost like a collective loss of innocence. And whether that is completely accurate or not wholly accurate, one of the common things, my faith is very important to me. And, one thing I realized a long time ago is when you live in a small town, you are your job title, no matter where you go.
Yep.
And so I'm rarely Cindy Daniels. Now that my kids are adults, I think, oh my gosh, I miss the days when I was Alex's mom or Addie's mom,
right,
rather than just the assistant superintendent. But at church, it's not unusual for someone, maybe 70 or older to approach me and say, you guys need to be saying the pledge every day.
Nice.
And I said, well, guess what? We are. And not only that, you can hear the pledge every day in every one of our classrooms. You can come to the patriotic assemblies that we have. I can tell you all about our civics education. I can tell you that Arizona instituted 6 or 7 years ago that in order to graduate from high school, every student has to be able to pass the U.S. citizenship test.
Nice.
Now, let me tell you, they already have to take a whole year of U.S. history and government to graduate from high school. So why should they have to pass the U.S. citizenship test? But what I will tell you is, on the very first crack, over 85% of our kids pass the very first time, which tells me we're doing a great job with civics education in Chino Valley. And so I always invite people, come and hear my 6-year-old kids sing Grand Old Flag in the morning, because this is the kind of thing that goes on in public school. And I'm sorry that, you believe something different and that it's making you angry or upset,
right,
when it's not true. So, one of the joys of my job is that I get to provide factual information to people. That's one of the good parts. But, schools, because we're all about, can you read? Can you write? Can you compute? Can you get a job? Can you make change at a register? Which is one of my favorite ones. Kids can't make change anymore. Well, I'm pretty certain that most of the people who are using dollars and coins are suspicious of non-cash forms of payment. And so it's very interesting because it's a generation gap.
Yep. More
than it is, can the kid count backwards from 100 or however you want your change counted back to you? And I get that. Schools are something, education is something to be consumed. And students every single day have a choice to decide, am I going to eat it, savor it, learn it, and grow from it? Or am I just going to do the minimum and get through it? And so it breaks my heart when people encounter a kid who probably hasn't put their heart and soul into their education. And maybe they do have trouble counting back change to someone, but is that education's fault? Or is it the fault of the consumer? And one of my favorite things to talk about is schools are judged on test scores. And right now, like I said, this is my 35th year in this business. I was visiting with some other career educators last spring. And what I asked them was, the tests that we give kids today, standardized tests have been around forever. I took the Iowa Test of Basic Skills when I was 6 years old. They've been around forever. But is the test that we give today to a first grader, for example, is it the same test we would have given to a first grader 40 years ago? The answer is no. The tests that we give today are almost 2 full grade levels academically above what kids were taking years ago. And so if politicians, if state legislature, if departments of ed are increasing the rigor by making harder tests, well, of course, kids aren't going to perform, because just because we make a test harder doesn't mean a kid physiologically, their brain's going to develop at that rate. Kids are kids, and brain development and growth and the capacity to learn and use higher order thinking skills doesn't change just because you make a harder test. And so in a lot of ways, we've set kids, educators, and public education up for failure. But I would also tell you that drives the narrative, because now I can say, well, of course we need vouchers. Public schools are failing our kids. So it's this weird, vicious cycle and symbiotic relationship. And in the end, you have to follow the money, right? Mm-hmm. Who has the agenda? Who's profiting from making these kind of decisions? And who are we harming in the process?
Right.
And so, our job, because it is to educate a populace, an educated populace that's literate is what keeps democracy alive. If you can't read or write, then you have to start relying on other people for your opinions, because you can't find accurate information on your own. And I'm a firm believer that public education is what keeps democracy going. Without it, without a broadly educated populace, you start moving toward only people who can afford education for your kids. And so you start thinking about, landowners during the colonial period who could afford to educate their kids, and education wasn't for everybody. And what did that mean to our country? What kind of civil unrest did that create?
A little bit.
Just a little bit. And I just spent a few days in Charleston, South Carolina, and that just really reaffirmed for me what that meant. And so I would tell you that we're doing, it's a calling. Public education is a calling, and you have to believe beyond the circumstances that are out of your control that when you show up every single day, you're not only doing right by the kids who are in front of you, you're doing right by society as a whole. And unfortunately, people take a beating for that now.
Right.
And so what do? We don't normally say, hey, let's redirect some of our budget to PR, because we're trained to think, spend the money in the classroom. We're not trained to think, spend the money on self-promotion.
Right.
But we're in an era where people need to know what is great about public schools.
Well, I want to kind of start to segue to end it there for a lot of reasons. There's so much to talk about, obviously, right?
Just a little.
And I want to address the media part. We need to start a podcast with you, and we'll find you a sponsor so you don't have to spend money. Okay. Well, I got a sponsor. I know that I'll pick it up right now, but we need you speaking monthly. And whether or not you bring in other superintendents, would you want to start a podcast to start conveying this type of information on a regular basis?
We need to.
Okay. We'll fix that. I want to do that because I'm learning so much just listening to this past 20, 30 minutes. And we can find a sponsor because that's...
And I could put you to sleep. I mean, yeah, I could talk
I'm wide awake because I'm kind of frustrated in a way listening to this stuff. Go, gosh, it's complicated on all fronts. It's just the housing issue.
And there's so much good stuff.
There's so much good stuff. Yeah, we could brag about that too. We got the housing issue. We got the empowerment scholarship accounts that is dinging our I didn't know this stuff, right?
And we didn't even talk about the effect of recreational marijuana on public schools. That's a whole other soapbox I have.
Yeah, let's not do a spoiler. Let's talk about that stuff going forward. And I'm not a doomsdayer or anything like that. I'm more of an opportunist and a positive person. That's why we have a positive media outlet. But let's have you back. And I want you to come in and bring in people. Maybe we have a roundtable with all the superintendents occasionally to get people up to speed on what the challenges are. Because I think a lot of them are the same and a lot of them may be very different. But we reach the region. I think these are all salient conversations in this time.
And we're at a really funny place in public education where we have to decide every day, do we talk about the challenges? If we talk about the challenges, does that keep people from bringing their kids to public school? Or do we only talk about the things that are positive? Because the things that are positive encourage people to bring their kids to public school. And this is a funny teeter-totter that we're on.
Yep.
And it's a very dangerous fulcrum, really. Because if you say these are the challenges that public education has, there are people who will say, I do not want my kids having anything to do with a public school. I'll just send them to a private school.
Right.
Or I'll keep them home and homeschool them. And so it's very challenging because to have that brutal honesty about challenges that we face couldn't have the opposite effect that we want it to have. And so we always have to be cognizant of what is important to our consumer. And our parent consumer is one kind of consumer. Our student consumer is another type. And our general public consumer, the taxpayer who has no children in our schools, is a different kind of consumer. And so it's things that face public education are very, very complicated because they're so politicized.
Right.
You know, we don't just get to talk about Friday Night Lights. We don't just get to talk about the valedictorian, right? We don't just get to talk about the kid who has worked so hard. Oh, every year. So one of the most fun things that I get to do in my job, and it's really not my job. I'm also on the board for the Chino Valley Education Foundation, and we do scholarships for students.
You've been doing that for a while.
We have, and Chino, we've done over $100,000 in scholarships just in the last 2 years alone. And Chino Valley Education Foundation is uniquely different from the other education foundations in the area in that the other education foundations use their money to support teachers. Chino Valley Education Foundation uses their money to support students. So it's just a very different focus. But every year, I always have some seniors who manage to find their way to my office. And I think kudos to you, brave people. And it was so cute this year. I got an email from a kid. She's like, hey, Cindy, I heard you help kids with scholarships. I thought this kid is gonna crap when she finds out what my job title is. And she called me by my first name, but it was adorable. I'm like, yes, Taylor, I do. Come on down. And she's, so she said, can I bring a friend? I'm like, yeah, bring a friend. And it was really neat because we have students who have significant needs in our community. We send home over 400 weekend meal bags with our students in a school district of roughly 2,200 kids through our Hungry Kids program. And we will send home over 100,000 meals with kids this year. That's part of the effort of Chino Valley Education Foundation. It's in conjunction with Chino Valley Food Neighbors. So it's a very concerted effort. But when you think that there are over 400 students in Chino Valley School District who meet the federal definition of homelessness, which is no regular fixed nighttime residence, could mean they're doubled up, tripled up, quadrupled up. The student who I'm talking about, they've been homeless due to a house fire for a couple of years, and she is completing her certified nursing assistant credentials through Yavapai College while she's with us. She wants to get her BSN. Yavapai just rolled out their BSN program. She wants to stay at Yavapai, get her BSN, and have a different life for herself. And she was brave enough to come and find me and say to me, hey, I heard you help kids with scholarships. And we do. And not only do we help kids with scholarship applications, we help them with college applications. We
need to talk more about that because I had this long conversation with my dog. There's so much unclaimed or untapped money of this sort for grants. And that partnership with Yavapai College, we could talk forever about that, is the CTEC program, that building over there off of Ridge Road.
I love it. It gives me goosebumps.
It does. We did a whole magazine on it.
Well, I can tell you a fun story about that. I can tell you lots of fun stories. Anyway, this kid, I just found out this week, a chapter of PEO, which is a women's organization, has awarded her a $10,000 scholarship. I got that news during spring break. That was better than anything I've heard in weeks. I was so excited for her because we get to give kids hope.
Yep.
And we get to give them a chance at a different life,
Yep.
at something that's more than a living wage.
Yep.
And so one of the things we have several students, we have 139 students this year in Chino Valley School District who are learning to speak English for the very first time. So they're, have come from somewhere else. They now live in Chino and we're helping them learn English. Well, one of the things that we do, because we don't want kids to learn English to just become the family translator.
Right.
We want them, their parents came here. Why? Because they want a better life for their kids. And so one of the things that we do is we have a Spanish speaking tour at CTEC.
Nice.
So we invite our middle school and high school parents who only speak Spanish to come. We do a tour at CTEC and we show them all the different kinds of programs their kids can be involved in if they learn English. Because you need to be successful in English, because it's not just the hands-on part. There are computer-based learning parts. That's a blended learning model at CTEC. So kids have to be able to read, write, and speak English at least on a certain level to be successful in these classes and pass their certification tests. I guarantee you there is a whole different conversation that goes on at home after their parents have toured at CTEC, because I know this. I got moms and dads asking me in Spanish on the way out the door, can we come here too? And this is why we do what we do. I get out of bed excited every single morning to go to work. After 35 years, my kids are like, Mom, are you ever going to retire? Sooner or later. But like, I want to give kids a hope.
That's awesome. Well, we're going to have you back to talk about all those good things, because there's hundreds and hundreds. Occasionally we talk about some data that people need to know about, but there's a lot of great opportunities and things that we can brag about that you allude to that. And I completely agree with you that staying positive and really bragging about the great opportunities you guys create and what the school district has been doing and what you're planning to do, the partnerships. Again, that CTEC partnership, I scratch my head sometimes when I hear young people go, I just can't find a job. I'm like, I could quit my job right now doing what I do, go get my welding cert, and probably go find work the next day anywhere out here.
So
I know it.
And one last thing I'd like to talk about before we go is the changes and things that we're looking at for next year. Because people ask me, are there going to be a lot of changes? No, other than sucking it in a little bit, to watch our money. And I'm a watch the pennies kind of person anyway. Some of the things that we are really focusing on are strengthening our community partnerships, working hard at getting the message out about what Chino Valley Schools is and how we're different and unique from maybe other schools in our community and why we're a great choice for families to make. And the other thing is we're working, COVID was the great interrupter.
Yep.
Right? It interrupted everything in society. It interrupted relationships. It interrupted how we function as a society. So one of the things that we're really going to focus on the next couple of years, every school in Chino Valley School District has the same colors and the same mascot. Now, the mascot's portrayed a little bit differently at each school. We're all the Cougars.
Yep.
And at our primary campus, which is preschool through grade 2, they're the Cougar Cubs, and they have an adorable little Cougar Cub for their mascot. At Del Rio, we're the Cougars, and they have a little bit more sophisticated looking mascot for grades 3 to 5. The middle school and high school have a little bit more athletic looking, ferocious. I had a little kid ask me when I had a sweatshirt with the high school cougar on it, asked me why I had a shirt with a mean kitty on it. Which I thought was pretty cute because it's the like aggressive looking
mean
cougar
kitty.
And so, but one of the things that we're going to really talk about and people will see a lot in our branding is the idea that we're all one pride, playing on that concept that a group of cougars is a pride. And so the one pride concept is something that people are going to see a lot of from Chino Valley with the tagline together. We are Chino Valley. And we're going to be rolling out a media campaign starting next year. In fact, starting tomorrow, we're going to be soliciting names and contact information about graduates from Chino Valley High School's had graduates for 28, 29 years now, maybe 30. I don't know. My son was in the 25th class, so I'd have to do the math, but 29 years, I think. We are going to be soliciting short biographies from people. And it doesn't matter what they've done. They graduated from Chino Valley High School. How have you gone on to find success in your life? It doesn't matter if it's in the military. It doesn't matter if you had some important rank. It doesn't matter if you have gone on to be a mom and Chino Valley High School set you up for this great life that you've had. Maybe you played sports. Maybe you've come back to work for the district. But we're going to have pictures of people, and it will say, I'm so-and-so, I'm class of blah, 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 blah. I am Chino Valley. And then there's going to be a couple paragraph biography about them, and it'll end with, and together we are Chino Valley. And the reason that we're doing that is because we want people to know, and those pictures, those placards are going to rotate through our website. They're going to rotate through our social. They're going to be in different schools, and we'll rotate them. They'll be in lobbies. They'll be in classrooms. They'll be in hallways, because what we want everybody to know is Chino Valley will set you up for success in life. And so that's something people can expect to see, because I always think a good individual story tells the whole story a whole lot better. So those are things that people can look forward to.
Awesome. Well, Cindy Daniels, currently Assistant Superintendent, soon to be Superintendent of the Chino Valley Unified School District. Thank you for coming in. And I hate to tell you this, you're coming back because we're going to get you a show where you can brag about all the great stuff that's going on as One Pride over in Chino Valley.
One Pride.
Thanks for coming in.
You're welcome.
Talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.